Shanti. May the infinite Lord of life, of love, and of laughter bless you at this moment. May each cell of your being and each petal of your mind be touched, be healed, be harmonized. May vim and vigor and vitality be yours. May love and laughter be yours. May you truly find that which you seek, and may you find that which you seek surely, swiftly, and most harmoniously. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. I'd like to welcome you to my heart and to the Temple of Kriya Yoga this afternoon for the noon meditation. Today, I'd like to meditate with you about the creative principle, about my creativity, my creative principle, about you, your creative principle. When someone talks to me about creativity, having an astrological background, I automatically tune into the idea of Uranus. And Uranus has a lot to do with creativity. And Uranus happens to be very strong in my chart. It has to do with unusual things, and along with the unusual, it has to do with insanity. So I guess people think I'm a little insane. Maybe I am. But at the same time, it's very creative. The two kind of mix with each other in some strange way, and I guess it takes a little bit of insanity to be creative, and if you're saying you're insane, you're pretty creative. So anyway, I think of that, and as I think of that, what also goes through my mind is that there's a link between Uranus and Mercury. Again, if I go back to astrology, we would say that Uranus deals with the Muladhara chakra at the base of the spine. And that's true, but that's the feminine side. Capricorn, Saturn, Capricorn, the feminine side. On the masculine side, you have Uranus. And what that means symbolically, and I think actually, is that there's actually a relationship between the creativity of Saturn and the creativity of Uranus. The creativity of the Saturn has to do with something foundational. It's like building a house. Saturn is the basement, it's the foundation. It's, to a certain degree, it's the part you don't see, but it has to be there or everything crumbles. And that's the creativity of Saturn. The creativity of Uranus is more of an airy type of creativity, which has to do with the mind. And then it goes back to those psychological types of patternings of the Uranus, which is extreme. Uranus is also extremism. It's one extreme or the other. As opposed to Mercury. Mercury is an airy planet, and it also has to do with the mind and with thinking, but it has more to do with the orderly thinking, and a much more balanced type of thinking. And it also has to do with paper. When I think of Mercury, I think of communications. It deals with communications. And creativity has a lot to do with communications. And Mercury deals with the throat chakra, along the spinal column. Does have a certain resonance that exists between certain resonance exists between the Mercury and the Uranus. And Mercury has to do with creativity. Mercury has to do with books. And in dealing with books, I start to think of paper, books, paper, the creativity of the Mercury having to do with communications, and that's primarily what the Mercury and the paper has to do with, and putting your thoughts down on paper. Putting them down on paper gives a certain immortality to it. In other words, if it's on paper, it's going to last beyond your lifetime. In fact, it can last many decades, centuries, lifetimes into the future by putting something on paper. There's a certain permanency to it. And so paper is very important. And again, when I'm just moving from one thought to another, when I think of the Mercury, think of the paper, I remember Shelley speaking a number of years ago, and someone had asked him a question about the Aquarian age, if I remember. It had to do with the age of Aquarius, Uranus. And what he said was that what was important about that was the Uranian aspect of it and the Uranus, but even beyond that, what was important is that in this age, it began when paper was mass produced. And he said something to the effect of, this isn't a quote, but I'm paraphrasing what he said, but when that happened, there was a shift in the consciousness of mankind, of the world. Up until that point, until paper was mass produced, thoughts and ideas were local and everything stayed local. But once the ideas and the thoughts were put onto paper, they were able to be transmitted not only within the local community or the local area, but around the world, literally. And it could be done relatively quickly. Up until that point, it took a long time if a thought was creative thought came about. It basically would stay within the community. And eventually it would leak out, get out of the community, but it was a very long, slow process. Once paper was mass produced, the ideas, the thoughts, the creativity, again, the theme of today has to do with the creative principle, but that creativity could be spread throughout the world very rapidly. And this was very important. Of course, some would say, well, that's all true, and I would agree with all of that. However, the concept of paper, or the idea of paper, came about, when I say mass-produced, kind of in conjunction with that mass production. Also, you have the printing press. The two kind of came together at the same time, and then there was this explosion in knowledge, and it was the Renaissance. But of course, giving credit where credit is due, paper is actually the invention of paper, the idea coming about of paper started in China, and that's true, and it started around the time of Jesus, where paper was actually invented. And actually that was believed for a long time up until a few years ago, when some archaeologists were doing some investigating, and they found remnants of paper dating back, still in China, but it dated back to around, if I remember right, around 200 BC. And so there was an earlier period where paper was invented or developed. Anyway, although it was invented that time, it still was a local patterning that was there. It still wasn't a worldwide patterning. In fact, the Chinese were very protective of the idea and of the invention of paper, and they didn't want it to get out. They didn't want anybody else to know about it. But it stayed that way for about 1,000 years, and it wasn't until 1,000 years later where the Arabs, the Arab community, was at war and battle with with China, and they came across this idea of paper. They found the paper there, and the concept, the idea of paper, and they brought it back to the Middle East. Now, it stayed in the Middle East for a few hundred years more, and then it wasn't until around the 1300s to 1600s where it came into Europe. Spain, I think, primarily was where it came about. But then again, the printing press was there, and the paper coming together, and all of a sudden an explosion occurred, and the explosion was called the Renaissance. And so that was the Renaissance, the rebirth, where we were coming out of the Dark Ages, and mankind was coming out of the Dark Ages, and now we had this explosion and transmission of ideas around the world. And I guess for me, it gets kind of interesting because China is heavily linked in with the idea of paper, and some of you may know that my wife is from China, and when she was young, she was born in China, and at the time China was under communist rule. Mao Zedong had taken over at that point, and there was a revolution which was occurring, the Chinese Revolution, around that time, and there was a heavy suppression of knowledge by the Chinese communist regime, and so people were discouraged from learning. They were discouraged from really communicating openly new ideas and things like that. And my wife, I think she has a little Uranus inside of her, and she was very, but she has her own ideas. She's strong-willed, she has her own ideals. And she loved learning, and she loved reading. That was the big thing, which is, I guess, in a roundabout way, what I'm trying to get to is that she loved to read. And I remember when I first met her, we would go to a restaurant, and if we would go to a restaurant, and this was in China, she'd pick up the menu and she'd read the menu. And I always thought she was looking for, what are we going to have to eat? And she wasn't. She was reading, literally reading the menu. She loved ideas, loved to think about things. And she was always very creative, always thinking about how she was going to start a new business and looking for new ideas on what business do I want to do, get into, what do I want to do, how am I going to make money, and things like that. And so when she was reading, it was to get ideas from it. And not only to get ideas, but to read what other people are thinking and what's on their mind, and to see if she could learn any new words, constantly learning new words. And that carried over into English. When she was young in grade school, she took English and she wanted to be English. She was in the top of her class in English, literally number one in her class learning English. And I remember when my wife, even when she first came here to the United States, I can remember we'd go to a restaurant, and we go into the restaurant, and she would immediately sit down, pick up the menu, and start reading the menu. And again, she was literally reading the menu. She wasn't looking for something to eat. She was reading the menu, looking for new words, to learn new words. And it was just kind of cute and interesting to see that. And something else that she did that I remember was paper was extremely important to her. I believe it was because it was so scarce when she was in China and when she was young. And she said she would tell me how she would go to the store and with a few Chinese pennies that she had, she would always like to buy little pieces of paper, or the packages, the small packages of paper, and she would spend her money on the paper, which relatively speaking was expensive to buy in China at that time. And she would take notes, and she would write real small so that she could save space on the paper. And she would tell me about this when she was going to school. And as she would write on the paper, she'd write small, and she would always then turn the paper over. When one side got filled up, she would turn the paper over and start writing on the other side. And when she would write on the paper, she'd fill the whole paper, so the whole paper had writing on it on both sides. And it actually was a little difficult for me to get used to, because I guess the American mindset of having plenty of everything, I would write. If I would use a piece of paper, I'd make notes on a piece of paper, or I'd type on a piece of paper, and print out the piece of paper. And when I was done with it, I'd just throw it away. Well, I would throw it away. She would go and take it out of the trash bin, and take it and start making notes on the other side of the piece of paper. It was an interesting experience. And to see that, and to see how, when she was brought up, and the conditions that she was brought up, how it affected her throughout her life. And so when we would print things, type on the piece of paper, and we want to print something out. At the time, we had a little business that was going, and so we would have stuff that we'd have to type out. And she always made sure she would go through all the paper and find paper that was blank on second side of the paper, she would collect that and put that into the printer. And so she would print on both sides of the paper. And again, kind of circling around and getting back to this idea of the noon meditation, which has to do with creativity. And it also has to do with paper and how paper has to do with creativity. And I guess that's, if there's a message or an idea that I'm trying to get across today, this afternoon, it's this idea of being creative, of creativity. And the creativity that exists within you, and trying to bring out that creativity. In yoga, we say, Aham Brahmasme, I am the creative principle. That's how it translates. My Sanskrit isn't quite good enough to be able to say in English, you are the creative principle. For you, I'm the creative principle for me, you're the creative principle for you. And in some way, shape, or form, each of us needs to learn how to develop that creativity. And part of that has to do with the Uranus principle, Uranus being freedom. Freedom of expression, freedom of thought, freedom of ideas, free to think whatever you want to think, free to say whatever you want to say. That's one of the blessings that we have in the society, the country that we live in, is that we do have the right to have this freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom of ideas, without having to worry about consequences to that. And so what I'm suggesting is that you should use that freedom, use that freedom that you have, use it to create the kind of life that you want to create. I always, in lectures, periodically in lectures, I would talk about karma and the idea and the concept of karma. And with the idea and the concept of karma, I used to say that the worst piece of karma that anybody could have is the thought, I can't. Oh, I can't be happy. Oh, I can't be married. Oh, I can't be rich. That thought, I can't, is the most uncreative thought, the most, the antithesis of creativity. For each of us, it's important to open up the mind, to allow the mind to expand, and to somehow overcome that negative piece of karma, I can't, and switch it and exchange it, and in place of it putting, sure I can. The image or the thought that comes into my mind is always, when I talk about this, and I know I've talked about it in the past, hopefully I'm not, if you've been to previous lectures or meditations that I've been at, I hope you're not bored by it, but it's this idea of golfing and going to golf. And if you know anything about golfers, you step up to the ball, you have the club in your hand, you step up to the ball, and you go to take the swing with the club. And an amateur golfer what an amateur golfer does is when they go to swing the club, what they're thinking is, don't slice the ball. That's what's going through their mind. don't slice the ball or don't hook the ball. One or the other. That's, one direction or the other. You want to hit the ball straight down the course. You want to go straight. And so what the amateur is constantly thinking is, don't slice the ball, don't hook the ball, don't do this. It's a negativity that exists in there. And so what happens is, that's what's in the mind of the amateur golfer, either slicing the ball or hooking the ball. And so they go and they take the ball and they swing and they hit the ball, and the ball slices off whatever direction, one way or the other. And then, of course, the golfer said, I knew that was going to happen. And I would say, yogically speaking, I knew that it was going to happen too, because that's all you were thinking about doing, was that you did exactly what you were thinking about. When a professional goes up to the ball, a professional golfer goes up to the ball, they're not thinking about the negativity of the swing. They're thinking how far they can hit the ball straight down the course. They're thinking, I need to do it. I need to place the ball, 20 yards past the trap over there, or I have to get the ball onto the green. And that's what they're thinking. I need to get the ball onto the green. And so when they swing the club, that's what's on their mind. And that's what the difference is between an amateur and a professional. That's the difference between being creative and not being creative. It's thinking positive. And if there's a goal in life that I would suggest, at least for the theme of today, the noon meditation, that you want to grab onto, to hold on to, and move towards, is moving towards positive thinking. What is it that you can do, not what can't you do? And what is your dream? The ultimate creativity. What is the dream that you have for this lifetime? What is it that you want to be? And, if you're young, if you're in your teens or 20s or whatever it might be, the whole world is open to you. It literally is. And I remember even thinking that when I was younger. It was something that came to my mind. I used to listen to inspirational speakers. I like to listen to inspirational speakers, and I have throughout my life. And I remember one of them talking about this idea that when you're young, you literally have everything open to you. And then there was a suggestion, as you get older, your options start reducing. You have fewer and fewer options the older and older you can get, the older and older you get. And notice what happened just there is there was a movement towards a negative thought. Oh, I'm getting older. When I was young, I could do whatever I wanted. I could marry whoever I wanted. I could get whatever job I wanted. I could do whatever career I wanted. And I had a lot of freedom to do whatever it is that I wanted to do. Now, as I get older, there's a tendency for the thought, for those of you that could be moving towards your 50s, 60s, 70s, whatever it might be. And so this idea comes into your mind. I'm getting old, I'm about to retire. I think I'll just kind of lie back and, I guess, go to sleep, symbolically. And yogically, that's a no-no. You don't want to do that. In fact, I would say, speaking in in terms of yoga and yoga concepts and ideas, speaking in terms of creativity. As you get older, you need to start thinking more about what is it really that you do want to do. And I'm very serious about this. What is it that you really, really want from life? And then start working towards it. And start working towards it even with more vim and vigor and vitality now in your older age than when you were younger. When you were younger, you didn't have the experience, you didn't have the wisdom. Your ideas were frivolous. My ideas were frivolous. And so, what's the old saying? Too old, too young, too old, smart. You get when you get old, then you get smart. Excuse me, I forget the phrase. So if you have the wisdom, you have the ideas, you have the knowledge, now that you're older, you start moving in the direction that you want. And you can say, well, wait a minute, I don't, my body's holding me back. The physical body is not as limber as it used to be. It's slowing down as I get older. And that may be true, but the mind should be still very active, and not only be very active, but it should be very active thinking about not necessarily what you're going to do in the next 10 or 20 years, but what are you going to do next lifetime? And that's, I think, a pretty creative thought. And what you really want to do as you get older. When you're young, yeah, you're thinking about this lifetime and what do you want to do in this lifetime. In your 20s, go into business for yourself and do something. And start working towards that, and you start working towards that for this lifetime. But then if you're older and you've gone past that, maybe moved into retirement, the mind has to become more active and maybe even a little more physically active than you would prefer. Always push the body. I've always believed that. Push the body a little bit more than it can be pushed, than it feels comfortable. Not painful, and I always have to say that. Not to the point where there's pain or you're creating pain in the body, but there's nothing wrong with being a little uncomfortable. It's like with yoga. When I teach yoga, you go and you do a stretch. You stretch until it's uncomfortable. If there's any pain, you're not doing the stretch properly. The same thing with as you get older. You stretch the body, you stretch the mind, you keep pushing the body and you push the mind, not to where it's painful, but you push it to where it's a little bit uncomfortable. And I think that's important. It's important. Otherwise, if you get too comfortable where you're at, you wind up sitting and becoming very lethargic. The body becomes very lethargic, and I think you grow older faster. What's the old saying? You want to be young at heart when you're 90 years old. You want your mind to be active and sharp, whether you're 16 or 60 or 90 or whatever it might be. And so you're always working towards the creativity, the creative principle. What can you do in this lifetime that remains? Whatever it may be, whether it's 1 year or 10 years or 30 years or 50 years more in this lifetime. What is it that you can keep doing to move forward and to improve your life, to improve your mind, to keep your life active, to keep your mind active? And it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter what it is, provided it's legal. Or as they say, yogically speaking, dream your dream, and dream your dream with as much energy as you possibly can. And the only rule or guideline is don't step on anybody else's feet. Don't injure another person as you're dreaming your dream. And I suppose I could put a plug in. And so what usually the safest dream is to dream so that you don't hurt anybody else is what can you do to help other people. And that's always a good direction to go in. If you don't know personally what you want to do yourself with the time that you have left, maybe start thinking about what can you do to help others dream their dream. What can you do to help others move ahead in their lives? And as they move ahead, remember, they'll pull you and bring you with them, not only on a physical level in terms of friendship and communications and dealing with other people, but also on a spiritual level. They're pulling you forward and upward as you help other people dream their dream, or help other people if they're in trouble, get out of the trouble that they're in, lift their spirits, lift their lives, and help them. And so part of the creative principle is not only creating something in your life, but helping those around you create things in their lives. And when you do that, you start on a personal level. You start with your own creativity in improving your own life, and then you move from there, hopefully, to getting married, if that's the path you choose. Helping the spouse dream their dream. And then perhaps you have children and you help the children dream their dream. And that's all a good thing. But then you have to move beyond that and realize that you have a community that you live in, and somehow you have to help the people in the community that you live in dream their dream. Again, keeping with the thought of the day, creatively. And always that idea, always that thought, creative. And as you do that, then you move from your immediate community into the world community. And you start to think, well, what can I do in my own humble way? What can I do to help the world community? Some people physically go out into the world and help others in other parts of the world. And you can say, well, I don't have that ability for whatever the reason might be, and that's fine. You can still help in your meditation, and I do that every day. I give a little blessing for the people that I know, the people that I'm closely involved with. Then I move that blessing out to the community, and then I move it from the community out into the country, into the world, move the blessing out into the solar system, the blessing out into the galaxy that we live in, and even moving the blessing out into the universe that we live and beyond that. And you use that to open the mind, to expand the mind, and move it from an egocentric awareness to a cosmocentric awareness. Moving it from awareness of the self to awareness of the world, and the world that exists beyond me and my world. And maybe even into the universe that exists beyond this universe. And give it your own blessing, which has meaning to it. And that's the connection. And the connection that exists is, again, one of the things we say in yoga, not in yoga, in mysticism, all forms of mysticism, and I believe also religions, that you are a part of the world, and the world is a part of you. I was, again, one of the things I keep talking about is when I did my meditation classes frequently, very often. When I talked about the meditation, someone would come up to me and give a meditative technique, and for the week, and a week later someone would come up to me and they would say, my God, I was meditating and I had this feeling all of a sudden that I was actually a part of the universe. And seriously, I had many students, not through the temple. I was teaching at a college. It had nothing to do with religion, so to speak. They had just come to a meditation class through a school, and they started to meditate, and they would say to me, I just had this enormous feeling of being part of the universe when I did the meditation. And so I would pass that along to you, find a meditative technique to use, and as you work with that meditation, that meditative technique, come to realize at some point you are a part of the world and the world is a part of you. And then whatever it is that your dream is, it's a part of the dream of the world. It's a dream of God. Your dream is God's dream. God's dream is your dream. And as you move and evolve and move closer and more swiftly towards your enlightenment, come to the realization that at some point the dream that you have maybe is less important than the dream of God, and start to dream the dream of God. And with that, with that thought, I'll close the noon meditation. Again, linking you and your creativity and moving it out to merge with the creativity of that which you would call divine. May the infinite Lord of life, of love, and of laughter bless you in this moment. May each cell of your being and each petal of your mind be healed, be harmonized, be touched. May vim and vigor and vitality be yours. May love and laughter be yours. May you truly find that which you seek. May you find that which you seek surely, swiftly, and most harmoniously. Om Shanti, Shanti.